Hello everyone, today we are going to the second part of the medial surface of the cerebrum, the sulci and gyri of the cerebrum. Earlier we learned about the central area, the corpus callosum, fornix, and about the sulci and gyri that are seen superior to it, including the paracentral lobule. Today we are going to learn more details in the front and the back and in the lower aspect and complete the sulci and gyri on the medial surface of the cerebrum. What you are seeing here is the Parieto-occipital sulcus, because that is between the parietal lobe over here and the occipital lobe over here. So it is kind of a landmark between these two. And over here you can see another sulcus. This is known as the Calcarine Sulcus. It is a very deep sulcus, and it is also very important because this sulcus is related to the visual cortex. Okay. And both of these are meeting at this point, and below that you can see an extension, and that is known as the anterior calcarine sulcus. So this is the calcarine sulcus. Some authors call it as the posterior calcarine sulcus, and this is called as the anterior calcarine sulcus. Now this is known as the lazy Y sign because in MRI this is a region that is used to identify very critical areas within this Y formation. So let us have a look at what those areas are. You can see it is both these sulci, the Parieto-occipital sulcus and the Calcarine sulcus, is creating a wedge of gyrus, and that is known as the Cuneus. Cuneus, if you remember, there is a script known as cuneiform script, which is basically made of wedges. So just like that, Cuneus is a wedge. And in front of the Cuneus, that means anterior to the Parieto-occipital sulcus, you have this rectangular area, and that is known as the precuneus because it is in front of the Cuneus. Now, if you go underneath, or if you go below the calcarine sulcus, you can see this gyrus. This gyrus is almost looking like a protruded tongue, and it is called the lingual gyrus. Now, if you look at the precuneus more carefully, you can see a sulcus that is formed here. It is roughly an H-shaped sulcus, and that is known as the subparietal sulcus. Now, subparietal sulcus is kind of demarcating this gyrus was taken in the previous video. This is known as the cingulate gyrus, and this region, this is known as the precuneus. So this is kind of demarcating between these two, and you can see that the cingulate gyrus doesn't end over here. It is kind of faintly continuing over to the posterior aspect of the splenium, and that region is known as the isthmus of the cingulate gyrus. Okay, isthmus is continuing on to the inferior aspect of the temporal lobe. We'll come to that later. All right, next we go into this gyrus. This is known as the medial frontal gyrus. Some authors, some textbooks name it as the superior frontal gyrus, which is just continuous with the superior frontal gyrus on the superolateral surface. But most authors call this as the medial frontal gyrus. Now over here you can see a gyrus that is looking almost straight, and that is why it is called as the gyrus rectus. Rectus, if you remember, the word means straight, and this is known as the gyrus rectus. Gyrus rectus can also be seen on the inferior aspect. We'll come to that when we learn about the inferior aspect too. All right, here you can see two small sulci. These sulci are called the anterior and the posterior para-olfactory sulci, and near that you have a gyrus. These two gyri are called as the paraterminal gyri. Paraterminal gyri, you have the name paraterminal gyri because you remember that this is the anterior commissure, and below the anterior commissure you have this region which is called the lamina terminalis. So since this gyri are very close to the lamina terminalis, it is known as the paraterminal gyri. You can see that the cingulate gyrus is kind of beginning from the paraterminal gyri and going posteriorly onto the isthmus. That's why cingulate gyrus is totally like a belt that is beginning from the paraterminal gyri and ending at the isthmus. All right, next let us look at the poles of the cerebrum. Okay, this is known as the frontal pole. And over here you can see this region. This is known as the occipital pole. And over here, this region is known as the temporal pole. I have a question for you. What is this structure? Okay, this structure looks like a pole, but that is not a pole. This region is known as the Uncus. It is a very important structure. This region is known as the Uncus. And let us have a look at where this Uncus is more clearly. This is an inferior view. Remember that this is a medial view, but this is an inferior view. In this inferior view, you can see that this gyrus, which the name will come to that soon, but this gyrus is kind of in front. It is curving backwards, creating the Uncus. So this same structure is what you are seeing here. So you can see this gyrus going like this, and in front it is curving backwards, almost like a hook. And actually the word Uncus means hook. Okay, so this looks almost like a hook that is kind of hooking this structure, and this proximity is very important. This is actually the midbrain. You remember that the midbrain was cut in the initial video over here. So this Uncus is in very good proximity with the midbrain, and you have a lot of important structures over here. And it's kind of important because there is a phenomenon known as uncal herniation, which we will come to that later. So this relation is extremely important. The Uncus is closely related to the crus cerebri of the midbrain. Next, we go to this gyrus. This was the gyrus that we told before. This is called the parahippocampal gyrus. You can see the parahippocampal gyrus is over here. And if you remember, the cingulate gyrus that you saw here began from the paraterminal gyri. It went into the isthmus, and it continues as the parahippocampal gyrus. The lingual gyrus also continues onto the parahippocampal gyrus. So that is how the parahippocampal gyrus forms. And in front, the parahippocampal gyrus will hook backwards, creating the Uncus. Okay, just on the lateral side of it, or on the hidden part of it, you have the very important part of the brain called as hippocampus, which is very important for in the memory circuit, in Pappas circuit, in limbic circuitry, and also important in diseases like in medial temporal lobe sclerosis, which causes epilepsy. Now over here you can see a couple of sulci. This is known as the Rhinal sulcus. Okay, rhino means near nose, so this is called the Rhinal sulcus, because earlier this region was called as the rhinencephalon, but that name is not there now. So this is called the Rhinal sulcus. And over here you can see this sulcus. This is known as the Collateral sulcus. So you can see these two sulci over here also. This is the Rhinal sulcus, and this is the Collateral sulcus. So just medial to the Collateral sulcus, you have the parahippocampal gyrus. Okay, so this is the parahippocampal gyrus. It is found just medial to the Collateral sulcus, and that can be a question in anatomy. All right, we go further to other structures or other sulci and gyri that you find over here. This sulcus that you find in the medial aspect, not very clear on the medial aspect, but more clear on the inferior aspect. Okay, this sulcus is known as the Occipito Temporal Sulcus, and that demarcates two gyri on the medial and lateral aspect of it. The medial one is known as the Occipito Temporal Gyrus, also called as the Fusiform Gyrus. And Fusiform Gyrus, the name, it's because it is fusiform in shape. It is an older name, and this is important in a disease condition called prosopagnosia, where you can't understand faces of people that you see. You can't recognize faces. So in that, this region is implicated. Lateral to the Occipito Temporal Sulcus, you have this region. This is called the inferior temporal gyrus. Inferior temporal gyrus. So the three gyri that you see here are parahippocampal gyrus, then the Collateral sulcus, then the Occipito Temporal Gyrus, the Occipito Temporal Sulcus, and lateral to that, the inferior temporal gyrus, which continues onto the superolateral surface. So these are the structures that you see mostly on the medial surface of the cerebrum. We'll go to a quick review of these two videos in a few minutes. Okay, these are the parts of the corpus callosum. This is the septum pellucidum, and this is the fornix, and you can remember that this is the anterior commissure, and below that you have the lamina terminalis. Next we see the olfactory sulcus, the paraterminal gyri, the medial frontal gyrus, the gyrus rectus, the frontal pole. This is the cingulate gyrus. This is the callosal sulcus. This is called as the paracentral sulcus, and this is known as the cingulate sulcus with its the pars marginalis of the cingulate sulcus, and this is the very important paracentral lobule around the central sulcus. And over here you can see the subparietal sulcus. This is the precuneus, the Parieto-occipital Sulcus, Calcarine Sulcus, anterior calcarine sulcus, the cuneus, the lingual gyrus, the parahippocampal gyrus, the collateral sulcus, uncus, rhinal sulcus, and the temporal pole. And over here you can see the Occipito Temporal Sulcus, which divides the fusiform gyrus as well as the inferior temporal gyrus. So these are the structures on the medial surface, and we've done a quick review of all these structures. Any of these can be a spotter question or a bell ringer question, and it is very important to review these sulci and gyri on the medial surface. Thank you.